Please welcome to the stage Cassidy Hutchinson and Christina Bellantoni.
Hi, everybody. This is incredible. What an amazing group of power women here. What an amazing woman to be sitting next to. Cassidy Hutchinson, thank you for being here. Thank you for writing this book. Enough. I can't recommend it highly enough. It's an honest read. It's a read that is both horrifying and revealing about what the last few years have, things that have happened in our country. And I just want to jump right in and talk to you about, the importance of speaking out, why you felt like using your voice at the moment that you did, and how that wasn't an easy decision, and what you came to. So, good morning.
Good morning, and thank you all for being here today. I'm very honored to be It's an honor to be here with you all, and again, with so many powerful and phenomenal women, and have the opportunity to speak with you all. My decision to come forward was probably the hardest and easiest decision that I ever made in my life. I did work for the former administration, and I'm not here to play revisionist history. I was very loyal to the former president when I worked for him. It's something I look back on now, and I have a different perspective on. But after we had lost the election, which I was very firm from the beginning, we had lost the election, and I slowly saw my colleagues and the former president start to unravel the foundation of our constitutional republic and our democratic systems, which eventually led to an attempted coup and insurrection on arguably the most important branch of our government, the United States Congress. And after that, I was playing this moral tug of war about what to do about it, and the January 6th committee launched an incredible investigation, and I just also want to take a moment to make note of their work, because without their work and without their willingness to speak to me multiple times, I wouldn't be here with you all today. But there were a lot of my colleagues during this time who were not only covering up what happened leading up to January 6th, but they're also actively planning to do it again in this next election cycle. So once I had made the choice to retain my own legal counsel, it was a very easy decision to me. We're currently experiencing a complete destruction of our constitutional system right now, and we're looking down the barrel, as it looks right now, at a potential second Trump administration. That cannot happen if we want our country to survive. So when I came forward to testify, I saw that as an extension of my public service, which, I really cherished my anonymity at that point in my life. And it was a difficult decision, actually, to decide to write the book, because I did cherish my anonymity, but this moment right now, it is so important to have voices like mine, or voices like Liz Cheney, or my former colleague, Alyssa Farah-Griffin, who were not only on the inside, or who are, or former Republicans, who can speak to the dangers of Donald Trump, because he right now is telling us, as he has for decades and years, exactly who he is and exactly what he plans to do. He plans to prioritize an authoritarian rule over our rule of law, and he essentially plans to continue unraveling the foundations of our country. So if we want our country to survive, it's imperative that we continue to speak out and speak to the dangers of this.
And you detail so richly in this book these moments that you had along the way. I will say from reading about your life, you're an incredibly strong and tough person. You once drove yourself to the emergency room when you needed an emergency appendectomy. You're in high school, right?
It's character building.
And so you are very honest in reflecting, like, this happened, and your spidey sense was off, like, this feels wrong. And then there were like a few moments where you really knew, so you write here, talking about leaving the White House, right? Some days I missed being at the White House and fantasized about an alternate reality where Trump had won, but other times it was painful to remember my time there. I felt a pain I didn't want to numb, but I didn't want to confront either. The magnitude of January 6th, the damage of Trump's election denial, and the toll the stress had taken on me would hit me full force, and I'd feel guilty for having played a role in the chain of bad decisions that led to January 6th. I wasn't to blame for it, and that's really important to point out, but I had been there. I hadn't done enough to stop it. I could have resigned, like some of your colleagues. I mean, you were in the room for some of these most consequential moments as you testified before Congress, as you write about this, and kind of walk us through when you had those crises moments of conscience, like should I do anything, and then you had this like realization, like now has to be it.
You know, sometimes it's difficult to shed light on just how powerful the Republican messaging machine is, but it's something that we need to come to terms with as a society. And, you know, I've been blunt and frank about this. When I was in this crossroads moment, so after the end of the administration, when I wanted the truth to be known and I had known what happened was terrible, I also knew that I knew a fraction of the information, but I felt that what information I had could still be valuable to holding people accountable, not necessarily in the judicial system, but in the court of public opinion. But there also was this side of me, and I don't say this in a flattering way, I say this with a degree of shame, but I have watched for years my former colleagues in the administration that made the break much, much sooner than I do. And they oftentimes are vilified by the left. Their intentions are questioned. Or on the right, they become martyrs. They could become exiles. There's not really a place for them. You know, and I think in this moment of time, it is so essential that we have productive conversations as a nation, that we not necessarily forget about how some of us were complicit. And thank you for reading that passage too, because although January 6th wasn't my fault, I was there and I could have said something much sooner. But I didn't. And I was fearful of retribution from the right. You know, Donald Trump invokes political violence on people, whether they're his former staffers, whether they are judges in our electoral system or in our government, to innocent people like poll workers. He will inflict violence on anybody who stands in his way of obtaining power again. And that was something that I was very conscious of as I made this decision, but it was also, in my view at the time, and still today, it was a very small sacrifice to make for what we are facing as a country.
How do you view the media's role in all of this, and how have they treated you? Does it give you kind of a different opinion? Obviously, you were in the White House, you weren't dealing with the press in the same way as some of your colleagues, but obviously the White House viewpoint was that the press was the enemy of the people. It's a challenging relationship between politicians and the press. I myself have been a journalist for nearly 25 years, most of those in Washington, some of them covering the White House, but now you're on the other side. You know, you're having to sit down with people on television and tell your story, and how fair are they being? How have they treated you?
Actually very fair, which has been, I've received a very overwhelming welcome and warm welcome from the press, which I'm extremely grateful for. And I recognize that I have a unique opportunity where a lot of other people don't. But at the same time, you know, I have immense respect for the press. I think it is integral to our system. But we also have to look at this on a global scale. And there are currently hundreds of journalists detained around the world in countries like China and Russia, who, by the way, the leaders of those nations, non-democratic nations, are leaders that Trump has expressed value for and that he would like to emulate their success. Donald Trump is a very clear attack on our free press, but I also think that the press, especially in this next year, needs to figure out a way to cover this election responsibly. You know, we can tend to fall into this system or this pattern of amplifying rhetoric rather than reporting facts. And when we start to fall into that pattern, you know, it's not as dangerous as Donald Trump instilling such doubt into our systems of government, but it also is setting up a false hope in a lot of ways for the American people, that justice is coming. We hope that our judicial systems will play out because there are good people in the systems that will execute as they are meant to be per our founding. But the press also needs to be conscious of Trump's platform and not amplifying his vast disinformation. You know, he is a big fan, as we know, of amplifying and proliferating poisonous conspiracy theories to his base, which they're good American people, but have been severely damaged and misled by him. So the press really needs to pay attention and be conscious of that in this next election cycle, because we saw what happened in 2016. No matter what people say, we can look at the popular vote, but where the vote mattered in 2020, in the swing districts, he lost by a razor-thin margin. And if it is, I will not concede that Trump will be the nominee. There still is time for somebody else to get in the race and make sure that Trump isn't the nominee, Republican nominee. But if it is another Biden-Trump ticket, it very well could happen again. And we need to have a serious conversation as a country, because if that does happen again, a vote for Trump is a vote for fascism. It's a vote to start marching our country towards a dictatorship. If we want to keep our constitutional republic, and if we want to keep our democratic institutions in place, we need to have conversations with people to make sure that every vote goes to the candidate that promises to keep those institutions intact.
Yeah, thank you. And we have some journalism students here in the room who are holding true to that, and that we're trying to teach at Annenberg.
Well, thank you. Any journalist here, thank you for the work you do. I know it's a very difficult job. I am not very envious of it, especially in this position now, because it's difficult. And like I don't have the perfect response on how to handle all of this.
And he's quite good at manipulating the press and getting their attention and being the shiniest thing. So here we are at the Power Women Summit. I want to talk a little bit about the women, your women in Washington, women that have really come together for you, help support you, especially at such a trying time, within the White House, your friend circle. Do you want to just talk about some people who you would consider mentors or who really came to your aid?
Yeah, I think there have been a few moments that have been really moving, but also extremely profound, and I think will stick with me forever. And when I worked in the administration, I worked in a primarily male-dominated environment. I look back now with a slightly different reflection. At the time, it almost felt empowering in some ways. But the behaviors of Donald Trump and the people he surrounds himself with, who, by the way, are still the people he surrounds himself with, who are still in a position where they could very well occupy a position of power in our government in a year. A little bit over a year. But when I made the transition to the right side of history, what I call the right side of history, and what I hope we are all in agreement in here. Thank you. I was embraced really for the first time in my life by women of incredible moral integrity, women who stood by me then and have continued to stand by me throughout this last year. Women like Liz Cheney, who wears her heart on her sleeve and has the courage of a founding father. I am very pleased to hear Liz Cheney getting a lot of applause in this room. But I think that also speaks to this moment of crisis in our country right now. I am a conservative Republican, a little bit more moderate leaning than Liz Cheney, but we can come together, and we have in many ways made great strides towards coming together, because this isn't about partisanship. This is about defeating an inherently dangerous man. But people like Liz Cheney, people like Alyssa Farah Griffin, who I worked with in the White House and is now a co-host on The View, women who have embraced me, and for the first time I felt this overwhelming sense of female empowerment and felt very comfortable as a female in this environment. And I think that we need to continue this trend, because men have been running this country and frankly the world for a very long time, and it's not going that well.
Yeah.
So we need to continue electing women to
Yes.
positions of leadership.
I love that. That's a good transition, Jay. I just wanted to briefly touch on, you mentioned when you got to the White House, you're 23 years old, you're working in the Legislative Affairs Office, working with a lot of Republican colleagues, the majority of whom are men, most of your colleagues were male, just kind of that environment. And then, we're all aware of sort of what Donald Trump is like and things that he has said. And you detail, just quite bluntly some things you experienced, just ickiness. I don't think anybody would be surprised to hear that Matt Gaetz, touched you and has said yucky things to you, or Rudy Giuliani. But in the same time, I just was struck, and I thought about my own time in Washington, just this sort of things where we blow that off and it just happens. And I had to acknowledge that, that you write about it. It's in the book.
Well, it was very normal to me at the time. And again, I look back now, I wish I had felt different. I was young. It was my first job out of college. I sort of rose to the ranks very quickly, and that's all of my experiences are something that I'm very grateful for. But looking back now with the reflection that I have and the perspective that I have now, not only do we need to have more women at the table to bring more diversity, to bring more perspective and equality to the room, because women are the people who have and continue to demonstrate the fortitude to save this country. But because these men, especially the men in Trump's orbit, have abused their power not only on a constitutional level, but by leveraging their power with women, and it's not okay. No matter what the gesture may be, if it's, we can classify it however we may please, but we cannot continue to exploit and demean women. Women need to rise up, and women need to realize and recognize, especially little girls, that their voice and their bravery is enough to defeat what is currently happening in our country.
Yes. So back to Liz Cheney, who is in the headlines a little bit today. You write in your acknowledgments, your appreciation for her. You say, Liz reminds us that true leadership is grounded in principle, and that change can be achieved through unyielding loyalty to our democratic ideals. And sort of, how this inspired you to write the book. So she floated the idea to the Washington Post today, or they asked about it, however that ended up happening, that, she could pursue a third-party presidential bid for some of the same reasons you've outlined here. She doesn't want to see Trump become president again. Would you go support her, maybe even work with her?
I will do whatever it takes to make sure that Donald Trump is never near the Oval Office ever again, except for when he reports to the Joseph Prettyman Courthouse in Washington, D.C. for his January 6th trial. It's about a mile away from the West Wing, and that's as close as he should ever get to the White House again. No, I think Liz is a fantastic leader. I think that she's meeting this moment, and she is surpassing it with grace and dignity and honor. And I think that Liz is somebody that we can all look towards, not necessarily as a political mentor, but as a Republican, a very conservative Republican who has a very long family history serving in conservative Republican politics, who also recognizes the danger of this moment and how we need to unite as a nation. And Liz has endorsed in the 2022 primaries, she endorsed Democratic women. She has expressed a willingness to continue doing that. The fact that she has been able to not only overcome, but set this standard for our country, that this is not about partisanship. This is not about whether you have an R or a D next to your name. When we're back in a place where we can debate policy productively, that means that we have fixed our wrongs as a country. But right now, there are much graver consequences that we are facing, and we need to fix the problem that we're facing right now first.
Now, often on college campus, I'm interviewing people that are closer to my own age or even older, and I'll say, look around at our students, and what advice would you give to your 22-year-old self? That wasn't that long ago for you. So I'm going to say, if you could go back and
4
talk
years
to
ago.
Cassidy, who was, graduating high school, the first in her family to go to college, and through such effort and hard work and going through a lot of personal adversity, what would you say to that person now from this couch?
I probably would first go back and give her a hug. When I graduated high school, I had an idea. I knew that I wanted to go into public service, and I would have been very proud of what I had accomplished. I think that I might have been a little fearful knowing what was to come, but I would go back and tell her that everything was not only going to be okay, but that you were going to come out stronger and better because of it. And I think, too, about this really profound moment for me where I was, on the verge of leaving Trump world for good. And I had a phone call with a Republican member of Congress who did not serve on the January 6th committee. And I was sort of having this mental breakdown one night, and I called him about this, and I didn't know what to do because I had wanted to be more forthcoming, but I hadn't been. And he told me to go look in the mirror. And at the moment, I was sort of like, no, this is embarrassing. I'm not going to look in the mirror. He's like, no, just go look in the mirror. I'll hold, I'll wait. So I walked over and he's like, do you like what you're looking at? And then quickly followed up, I'm not talking about your appearance. Don't tell me if you like what you look like right now. Do you like the person that's looking back at you? So for little girls especially, but women and anybody who needs a reminder that self-reflection is an extremely powerful force that we all need to exercise and utilize more often in our lives, but that we are also the only people or person that has to live with our decisions for the rest of our life. And I am now in a place where I can sleep very restfully at night knowing that I have made the right decisions not only for myself, but I'm confident I've made the right decisions for my nation as well. And no matter what field you go into, just to be able to keep your morality and your moral compass intact, which is going to be tried and it's going to be tested, and there will be so many times in your life where you're almost wanting to go the other way because sometimes it's easier to make the wrong decision than it is to make the difficult decision. But the difficult decision is oftentimes the one that's the most rewarding and yields the better outcome in the end.
Yeah, absolutely. That same member of Congress, I will say, also told you to take a vacation and get some sleep for the first time in many months. So that's good advice.
His name is Sam in the book. Sam offered a lot of very sound advice during that period.
Well, the book is enough. Cassidy Hutchinson, thank you so much for sharing your time with us here. Thanks to all of you. You've been a great audience.
Thank you all for being here, too, and to Sharon for welcoming me.